ko naman sa hanin kinkinan mo kanutan kalis kwa kwa. Kwela jato hana kwela ka weiti se lo tolong lewa laban dalas. Ai kila lo wak ma ako isla ika Jahla jato hi dagi kame jahla hi lasno kai kawa kai lo. Akan ako lam. Mama saya lamah sudah kampung.
Yo, Nugu, I'm Betty Quirtel Schmidt. Hello, my name is Betty Quirtel Schmidt, and I am from the Liquiltalk people of Campbell River, and I also am from the Salish people from Squamish. And we are going to be covering the Kwakwakiwak area with from Campbell River and Cape Much up to the northern tip of the island and the surrounding islands. And also I will be interviewing one of the ladies from Comox, which is Salish, and we will be covering the years between 1915 to 1945. The women that I have interviewed will be telling of their experiences from early childhood on to later years. It was during this time that the potlatch was banned. It was actually 1922 that it was completely stopped. And the potlatch is a ceremony that our people have that actually, because we didn't have any written form of keeping our information, the potlatch was a way of inviting people to witness what was happening. So this is how our whole system was passed on, through coming to these gatherings and witnessing the happenings of dances being passed on, names being passed on, and even weddings, births, and just all the different celebrations that were happening was all of a sudden stopped. So our people were then having to learn the new ways of living, going from living in a big house to living in a home. That was just so fast in this between early 1900s to 1922, when they actually tore down the big houses and started to build houses like the pioneers that were coming to this area. Here we have Amy Williams Quirtel telling us of her own birth. So you were born in Squamish?
Yeah, born in Squamish.
And you told me when I was here last time about when you were born.
Yeah, my father went out them white goats way up the mountains. And I guess he took Dan and Joe when they were young yet. They could climb mountains, so he went with them. And they said, Mom's going to be okay. She knows what to do if the baby comes. Sure enough, I came that day. Next day that they didn't show up. I was born. She delivered them. She had no phone. She had no way of letting the other people know she was having a baby. So she just got everything all ready herself, and she had me all by herself. Yeah, she couldn't find nothing, so she just ripped down the flag and wrapped me around there. And after that, when she cleaned up, I guess she just cleaned up and destroyed everything that she split. You know how they clean up, I guess. And she went and bathed me, and she said she never bathed me. She put oil all over my body so I'd be healthy.
What type of oil?
That one we use for cleaning on them. What is it? Bear grease? Just white, just like cream. And she rubbed it all over me. She said I was a healthy baby. Yeah.
She then wrapped you in...
Yeah, wrapped me in that Canadian flag. That's the only thing. All the other things were upstairs. So she couldn't climb stairs then. She said she was too scared to.
The childhood experiences of the women that I interviewed they didn't have a lot of time to play. A lot of them were helping their families. When their parents were traveling, they would travel with them, and also they started early in assisting with work in the home, such as looking after sick family members that were at home. They would then stay at home, and so in the early days, the education to their parents was not important to them. They wanted them to basically stay at home, because telling me that her mother actually hid her from the social workers or Indian agent at that time, I think, so that they wouldn't find them. So every time they would come around, they would actually hide the two children that they had at home, so they wouldn't be taken away and taken and put into boarding schools, which we will hear later on. Here we have Mary Frank Clifton, born in 1900 in Comox. She was born in the Longhouse and actually grew up in, she is part Salish and part Kwakwaka'wakw. She grew up in the Comox Valley and later married a fellow from Hartley Bay, where Mary learned to speak the Tsimshian language, then later moved back to Comox to live, where Mary is still residing. She is sharing with us her education. Did you attend school?
No, I never went to school.
Not
No.
in Comox here. Was there a school?
There was school here. I went for about 2 days. You have to walk so far. The school was so far. They don't like today now they got picked up. The kids had to walk. Then you have to have lunch. There was 3 of us. So the 2 of us just quit. One, the Mitchell boy went. He was the one that goes right through. But he died very young. I think he was same age as me.
Mm-hmm. So you only had 2 days of school?
Yeah. I never went again.
So nobody came to say that you had to go to school?
No, they don't bother.
Here we have Mary Asu Vosberg Gunderson. Mary was born at Quadiaski Cove in 1910. She had a twin sister who died at birth. Mary's mom is from the Likwaltok people of Cape Much, and her dad is a non-native. So Mary will tell us about what it was like coming from a mixed marriage.
My father had to pay for my room and board there because I didn't have my status.
Mm-hmm. So it was a native boarding school then?
And it was, having only a half-day school, I was advanced.
Mm-hmm. And what did you do the other half a day?
Worked at Dr. Rayleigh's office. I worked in the sewing room for a very short while, and then I worked in Dr. Rayleigh's office. That was a little bit of a favoritism because I was a paying student, I guess, because there was a lot of resentment there.
With the other students? Or?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was very advanced because they have only the half-a-day school. They're bound to be behind.
And what did the other children do in the other half of the day that they were there?
They were in sewing rooms, laundries, and kitchens.
So they were being taught domestic, do you feel?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The education that was available wasn't very high because they only reached grade 6. From there they then would go out to work, which actually prior to that they were helping their parents working in canneries as children, and then as they finished and got older and finished school, they then went out to do various jobs such as housekeeping, working in in kitchens, like domestic work was basically the jobs that the women were able to work at due to the training that they got in boarding schools and at home. Some of them were not able to actually go out and work due to family sickness in their family, so they stayed home and assisted their parents in raising their younger brothers and sisters, or just helping out at home. Okay. Here we have Eleanor Wilson Cliff from the Lequotalk people of Cape Much. She was the oldest daughter of the Wilson family, and being the oldest, stayed home and looked after her mom. She attended school up to grade 6. So here we have her telling us about being a homemaker.
I just reached as far as grade 6, so that was it. And then I was the oldest one in a school, so I had to quit school and take care of my mother because she was not well. After 2 years she was bedridden, so I had to look after her. Yeah. And all the rest of the family, they, married and had their own families, and I was the only one left. Yeah.
So you got the job of caring for your mom?
Mm-hmm. My first job was looking after a store in a fish camp with my father.
Where, in what area?
That was Yokohama Bay. And we bought fish, and I didn't know one fish from the other, even if I did throw for them. And my father was bedridden, and I had to look after the fish, and this fisherman come in with loads of salmon. My father said, how much did he have? I said, so-and-so. Was he that's too much for a trawler. Was he a gillnetter? Yes. That he did not have coho. He must have had a lot of dogs, which he did.
So you stayed in the boarding school until you were?
About 9, I think. Mm-hmm. 9 years old when they took me out of there. I didn't want to leave, but my sister wanted to leave.
You went back home?
Mm-hmm. Took us home and just stayed home. After that, we babysit for Simon, babysit for Jacobs and everything like that. And now we're shifted here and there. I told my mom I'm getting tired, but you treated like a little lost little kid. I said, going back and forth. I was raised up to and no education, anything like that. And I said I was sorry I left school. I should have stayed there, but I didn't like what they were doing in there.
So when you were older, did you get any jobs? Where did you work?
Oh, I worked. I still kept on babysitting. I used to make money enough for my shoes and clothes. I babysit for all the family, and that's all I.
What about housekeeping?
Housekeeping? Oh, I went housekeeping there when I was about 16 years old, way out West Point way. I worked for a teacher, English teacher.
During this time, marriages were still being arranged by your family, which was the custom of our people. And you didn't have a choice who your husband was going to be or who your wife was going to be if your family decided that it could have been as early as your birth that they have decided and picked your husband or your wife for you.
They had an Indian marriage, I guess. I didn't know your dad from Adam or Eve. Yeah.
So you had a arranged marriage then?
Yeah, arranged marriage. They said just for a couple of weeks or something, I'll get married to him, and then they'll let me go. They said you got to be married. So what they do, and next thing you knew, they were getting me clothes, and I was getting married. And I said, I don't even know the man. I said, I started to speak up for myself after I told him, I don't know the man. I said, well, you went for a walk with him. Mom says, you should have said something to him. You should know each other. And
so you moved back to Campbell River and lived here in your own home, or did you?
No, I had to live with the old lady. Yeah. And there was a big household there. There's quite a bit of them living there. There was Dorothy, Francis, Maud, Butch. All of them were going around together. They weren't married yet.
Was this then in a built house, or was it still the big house?
The big house, yeah. The big long one that was down on the...
Down on the spit there?
Yeah, big long one.
So you actually lived in that house for a while?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was it like living in there?
Oh, it was... I wasn't happy anyway because I didn't know their language. And then when I started being pregnant, I was so touchy. You were going to come, I guess, and you were supposed to be a boy. And what was it? He says, I just couldn't enjoy myself in there. I felt so lost, and I was the only one from North Van around there, and I couldn't understand their language. I thought they were talking about me all the time. I'd basically get off the table crying away in the room. And the old lady comes to me, and Lily, she said, she said, what's the matter with you? I told her, I don't know what's the matter with me. I said, I just get so touchy. I said, I want to cry all the time. You want to go back home? I should have said, yeah. And then she says to me, no, we're not. We never talk about you. We're just telling each other how good of a cook you are. And I just learned how to cook too, eh?
Some of them were very young when they got married and were not explained about the birds and the bees, as we'll say. And so when they got pregnant and had their first child, they were assisted by midwives, which was either their aunt, grandmother, or family friend that would come over and assist in the birthing of the babies. And you mentioned your brother was born on Denman Island. Yeah. What was your mom doing on Denman when he was born?
They were digging clams for American buying clams. They were paying 90 cents a sack. And that's why they were there.
And when she had him, did she go somewhere to have him? Or
no, she just had it in a tent.
Yeah.
It was a nice morning that morning, and she told us to go play. And when we came back, there was a few kids, and the baby was there.
So she just herself delivered the baby then?
Well, there was a ladies that look after her.
Oh, yeah. So if there was other ladies around, they assisted in the birth. Health care in this time period was the women would either go to a midwife or someone that had knowledge of herbal medicines that were used at that time because of being maybe traveling, going up north to the Canneries and needing some medical help. And of course the doctors at that time were not available, so they would then resource to using medicines that our people used. Okay. What about medicines? What was the doctor's availability to the people?
Well, I guess they were all right, because whenever anybody was sick, they'd come to the doctor. But a lot of, I guess use your own medicine when it was way back, like, you know, there was no doctor here to go to. And they found out they could use roots and things like that, herbs, a long time ago.
So everyone learnt how to use the plants, or were there certain people that...
Certain people, I guess, knew how. Because my auntie that lived on the spit, she made me some out of that wild cherry.
And what was that used for?
I had a touch of tuberculosis, and I had to drink that.
2 days he was gone to get roots from certain trees, and they don't tell anybody what they are. They just boil them and boil them till it just look like tea, and they put it in. One just looked like tea, big gallons of them, and the other one there was for take the germs out or something, and that was just pure white. There was them big clubs, you know, the ones they have on the creek over here.
Devil's Club?
Yeah.
Or
they got the big
plant?
onions out of them. And some parts of the leaves, I think, or something.
So they used pitch for
sores. Auntie had that poured in her back. You see that big hole she had? The old man did that because her inside boiled wouldn't bust. So he turned around. The doctor gave her all kinds of medicine that didn't work. The thing was just pounding on her back. So she says, do something, she said to the man. So he did. He went and got pitch and got clamshell, and they boiled it into all that thing that's just pure. And then go there, and I guess she was ready for it. She knew it was going to hurt. And he poured it on her back. And he says, not about an hour, not even an hour, he said that thing busted and just all that bad stuff come out. And that was it. And she said she was cured from it. Yeah. And then another thing I knew was stinging nettles for arthritis. That's what my mom used to use. She used to go and get the stinging nettles and whip it all over her body. Her body be just pure red. Get in the water, sit down, grab a nice rock, and she'd rub herself to get all that sting thing off her, I guess. And she said she'd get out of there, she's just feeling good.
You mentioned once about white berries that your grandmother used to use.
Oh, the leaves of those white berries. I guess you see them, there's lots. Well, she used it. My mother was sick, and the doctor wanted to operate on her. She didn't want to go. No, it was swelling up. So she did, my grandmother did that and smash it up and heat it up and throw it. So that lump there was gone. And the doctor tried and asked her what happened. They see her. She was all right then. And she says, my mother fixed me medicine. They try and go and ask her, of course she can't speak English or anything. But it worked.
The women recall as children themselves, and later on as when having children, the safety that was very important, because you're traveling with your children, especially when they were going from jobs, working in the canneries and traveling by boat and living near the water all the time. So it was very important for the women to be sharing with their kids and children and telling them, you know, all about being careful, especially on the water. So while you were on the float house with your children, were you ever afraid of them falling in the water?
They worked on my second daughter for over 3 hours. She fell overboard. Someone had left our gate open, and it was snowing and blowing, and the men were home from work, and they were cutting wood with the drag saw, they called it those days. And my little girl had gone out there, and those men worked on her for
at least 3 hours. My father kept saying he happened to be visiting us, and he kept saying, she's gone. She wasn't gone. If she was gone, she'd have brain damage today.
She survived.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
I had a first aid book, and I'm reading the instructions while they're working on her. That seems like yesterday.
So that was the only incident then that with your children.
Yeah. And we lost our home. It burned up too.
Yeah. The traveling that was done by the families and would be, of course, done by canoe, and they would pack up all their food and clothing and children, and off they would go, traveling in their canoe, which sometimes took days. So they would have various places that they stopped to rest and sleep. And you mentioned coming over to Campbell River with your mom to visit your sister. How did you come over?
We had a rowboat.
So it was quite easy to come over, like to row?
Yeah. And we just watch the tide and come with the tide. So we come land on a beach here when there was beach.
When I was young, we traveled on a canoe to go to work in Cape Munch, in Cove, where the ice go. So canoe up there, canoe back down.
Did it take long?
Yeah, it will take all day.
Squamish is quite a ways out from Vancouver.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that she used to go by canoe to Vancouver.
Oh yeah, we all got on like the canoe. They got the mate down here. Oh, my dad had one big one like that. It was light though. It wasn't heavy like this one. Big, wide thing. You could sleep this way. You could play around in there. We take out 5 in the morning down the river. And you got to watch where you're going because there's big stumps, you know, in the river. It take us 2 to 3 days to get down to Capilano. We had chickens aboard, my mom's jam, and her smoked fish, everything. And we used to make it down there. She had made a sail for the boat, you know, the flour sacks, and she sewed them all together and then put it up the sail all the way where the wind would take us. See, we get there, we park out one place there where we used to go. There was a little shack there. You stop there, no windows or anything. Me, I wouldn't get off because I was scared of bears. And my mother said, "Won't come out tonight." And I said, "No, I'm not going off the boat. We're going to anchor you out." And my father said, "Okay, that's all right." I understood everything they said, you know, in our language. But now I try to talk it, I can't anymore. Yeah.
The jobs that the women did were working in canneries, and they would also go off to work by digging clams, and they were the ones that actually had control of the money as we talked about the changes that were happening. They then started to use money to purchase things for their families. What did the women do? Were they allowed to spend their own money, or did the husband look after the money?
Oh, the women's always look after the money.
And how old were you when you started working at the cannery?
About 12, I guess. Yeah. My sister and I used to work there quite a bit. Yeah.
And what was your jobs at the cannery?
Piling cans, you know, up on the table, like, you know, before I started to fill. But later on I learned how, and then I started filling cans. And wages were cheap them days.
What was the wages at the cannery?
Well, you have these, what they call tickets. Every time you filled a tray of canned fish, and then they punched one hole on your ticket. I don't know how many there was there, but there were only $7 a ticket. So that was very cheap them days.
What about the food when you went gathering food, like for yourselves, for your family?
Well, like clams,
Mm-hmm.
you can, they steam it. I remember my mother and I and my brother Isaac, we went to Seal Island to dig clams. And my father didn't go. And she had basket, you know, with holes in my grandmother made. And she just put it in there. She's digging and putting it in there. And she wash it and just spill it in the boat. And the tide comes up, so the boats just floated up and then we come back. And down the beach, I guess my father just knew how far the tide comes in. And he built a big fire when we got there. So the canoe just nosed in this. So he threw all those logs that was burning. And those big rocks, they're just red hot. So they put all the clams on it and then cover it up with sacks. Steam it. So they just tried it, and when it was loose from the shells, instead they threw all the sacks away. Then she washed them and put them in the sticks, 3 sticks. Then they built a fire again and put it, standing them up to brown it. When it was brown, then she had a mat on the floor. Then they put the clams, they put another mat on the top and step on it, flatten it out. Then they smoke it so they get all hard. They could keep it for the winter.
Changes were happening with marriages, as I'd spoken about earlier, where Native women were marrying non-Native men. So, and actually, in that time period, I don't know how well the women were accepted by their own people and the non-Native culture, because I'll just talk a little bit about myself because I'm married to a non-Native person. So it was a while before I was accepted by the non-Native people. So in the white society, I was still looked at as a Native person, but in my own culture, I was looked at as not a Native person because I had married out of my culture. So I think probably in that time it was even harder for the women to be accepted in both cultures.
I was married when I was 18 years old.
And you met your
My
husband?
husband was packing fish for the same company we were working for.
And you mentioned later that you traveled with him and lived in a float house?
Yes, we lived on the float house for 10 years. That float house was almost as big as a lot. And we moved from claim to claim, as they called each logging area.
And what was the social life there like? How did the women...
They were very nice once you got together, which was once in a blue moon. Anything for an excuse for a party. Christmas time, we all went from camp to camp during the Christmas holidays.
So you celebrated Christmas and... seeing that we're on Christmas, was there celebrations in the villages? Was there any such thing as Christmas in the village? Do you remember?
No,
like with the Native
not
people?
in the early years. Then when Reverend Scott came, they had concerts. And Mrs. Howard was also teaching at the Cape. And Reverend Scott would invite me to their concerts. And I was included on the gifts. Not before that. But that was Reverend Scott himself. He was a fine man.
You still speak your language, right?
Yeah.
And you all...
Well, I never used to speak the Cape much. I used to speak the Comox language. But when my sister got married, we used to go up there, and that's how I learned to speak the Cape much. Now I speak more Cape much than Comox. There's only two of us that still speak the language here. My niece, Mrs. Wilson, Irene Wilson, and me. The rest is gone.
Yeah.
The language is gone.
Maybe just say a little bit in the language here. Yeah, just...
Hola, hoye. That's Rila Kesta.
Oh,
Hala Kesta. Emma hoye.
The women witnessed a lot of changes during this time period, and as quoted by Bobby Joseph at a potlatch in Alert Bay, where he stood up in the house and reminded the people that if it wasn't for the women, a lot of what was happening wouldn't happen, because he felt that they were the backbone of the people that were standing up front. So I tell you, that house just roared for those women. Halakisla.
Now I have a grand room in the inlet, all filled up with cedars I've stole, and before I will have a dry Christmas, oh, that boom will be towed out and sold. How's that?
That's very good.
Woni na la ha na nwa la kwang ho ta tu kwali so sa mni uti na nwa la am tum nam kai ma me tu nam kai da ne ta khai na kwala pi to kwa la pa sala pi to qua chế sẽ là bị chỗ ayu thay chi là ayu thay chi là khi năm ta khai ya là khi năm ayu sti sẽ là sẽ có yos làm là sẽ ayu thay là ai khác ayu sti sẽ là ayu thay chi là rồi lên ní khi đã ăn em khăn ملك كنا أقول لما كنا أقول كهدن خلاص لو أني تيلم سكبك ما أنا شو أمي كم يدك سكبك بخلاص تيلم سكبك ني كده تنخل لا جاتون أنا كويلا كاويكي في أي شيء لا وما أخش إسلائيكا كغلجات وهي تجي قمي لا إسلا خشنو خي خواخي جو سوق ولا لاقي هي جامتي الكويتيسا أساس لاخ ولي الكوا ملا مستجاخن كيو سوق ولا لاقي هي جامتي الكويتيسا